For years, I believed that missing someone meant I hadn't let go properly, that grief was a kind of failure. So I kept pushing it down, telling myself, move on, move forward, be stronger. But the weight never left. Then I found one quiet line from the Buddha, not about releasing the ones we love, but about how love itself never truly leaves. It changes shape. It becomes something you carry forward, not something you bury. In the north of India, on the quiet outskirts of a small town, two sala trees stood side by side. Beneath their branches, an old man lay down to rest. The air before dawn was still. Stars still faintly lit the sky. His disciples had gathered around him, and no one spoke. Each time the wind stirred the leaves, the only sound was the soft brushing of hands against wet cheeks. This man had lived 80 years. For 45 of them he had walked, always walking, always teaching. The soles of his feet carried the marks of a very long journey. As the first pale light of morning began to rise, he breathed his last, and his disciples' quiet weeping spread through the space between the trees. No one knew it yet, but what was about to happen next would become the beginning of a question about what it really means to leave something behind. In the months that followed, some of his disciples gathered every word they could remember and held them up to one another like fragments of a broken bowl, trying to see if the pieces still fit. Others packed their robes and walked back into the forest alone, certain that the only true inheritance was silence. Both were right, and both were wrong, in the way that only the deepest things can be. For the bowl, even reassembled, could never hold water the same way it once had. And yet the man who carried nothing into the forest still walked in the direction the old teacher had pointed. The news of the Buddha's passing spread quickly to the surrounding kingdoms. The Malla people of that town were the first to receive his body, and they cremated it with great care and reverence. Smoke rose into the open sky. What remained were bones, white, luminous bones. And then the unexpected happened. One by one, messengers began arriving from distant lands. A representative of King Ajatashatru of Magadha stepped forward. The Buddha spent much of his life in our kingdom. Please, share his remains with us. The Lichavi clan of Vesali sent their own envoy. We too received his teachings deeply. We ask for a portion. The Shakya clan of Kapilavatu, the Buli clan of Alakapa, the Koliya clan of Ramagama, the Malla of Pava, a Brahmin from Vethadipa. They came one after another, each with the same request. The Buddha belonged to us. Our land has the right to enshrine his remains. The air in that place grew tight. The words were polite, but beneath them, something was pulling taut. Everyone could feel it. If this continued, there would be conflict. Then a Brahmin named Dona stepped forward. He stood before the gathered crowds and spoke, quietly, but with weight behind every word. Friends, let us pause for a moment. What is it we are about to fight over? The remains of the Buddha. But what did the Buddha teach us throughout his entire life? Patience, loving kindness, harmony. Consider how far this dispute stands from everything he stood for. Silence fell over the crowd. Dona continued, Then let us do this. Divide the remains into 8 equal portions and let each region build a place of offering. Instead of 1 shrine to the Buddha, there will be 8. Will his legacy not reach further that way? No one argued. The remains were divided equally into 8. Each envoy received their portion with care and returned to their homeland. Dona himself, it is said, received the vessel that had held the bones and built a shrine there too. But as the crowd dispersed, one elderly disciple walked away quietly, carrying a question inside him. We divided the bones, but was what the Buddha left us really inside the bones? That question stayed with him. It shifted and deepened over a long stretch of time, and then one day he found his answer. It was words, it was questions, the teachings his teacher had spoken while walking. He realized they were still alive inside him. Those who received the bones built shrines, but the disciples who received no bones, they kept the words. They traveled and shared them. They said to the next generation, This is what he said, and passed the teachings on. Both ways of carrying someone forward, the shrine and the story, kept the Buddha alive in the hearts of people, each in its own quiet form. Years passed, and the shrines became places where strangers wept together, where mothers brought sick children, where old men sat in the early morning without needing to explain why, and the words, passed mouth to ear across mountains and rivers, arrived in villages that had never heard the name of that small town where the smoke once rose. In this way, a single life became many lives, not divided, but multiplied. How did that story sit with you? You might have thought, how foolish to argue over the remains of someone like him. But let's slow down for just a moment. Were those people foolish, or were they simply deeply grieving? When we lose someone we love, we reach desperately for something solid, something we can hold, a photograph, a keepsake, a piece of clothing that still carries their scent. That isn't foolishness. It's a natural human response to an unbearable kind of pain. But here's a question worth sitting with. Where does that pain come from? Is it coming from the grief of losing someone dear? Or is it coming from something deeper, a belief tucked quietly in the heart that says, this person should still be here. They were not supposed to disappear. Buddhism offers a gentle but honest challenge here. The suffering doesn't come from losing someone. It comes from holding on, from the grip of, they must not be gone. Everything in this world changes and passes. But when we clench our hands around what is leaving, what are we really asking for? We are asking for something permanent in a world that has never offered permanence. That is the shape of our suffering. The people who gathered to dispute the Buddha's remains were trying to keep him, to hold his presence inside something physical. If we have the bones, maybe he's still there. Perhaps that was the feeling. But Dona's quiet observation pointed somewhere else entirely. Look at what you're doing right now. Look at how far this moment stands from what he taught you. This is a profound shift in how we see things. We assume that preserving the Buddha meant preserving his bones. But what if preserving him meant letting his words live on inside us? Let's tilt the lens slightly. When you remember someone you've lost, what comes to you? Their voice? The way they laughed? A single sentence they said at just the right moment? The body does disappear. There is no question of that. But the things they said, the way they lived, the questions they sat with, where do those go? They don't live outside you. They live in you. And here is something worth thinking about more deeply. When we say the Buddha lives on, we don't mean some fixed, unchanging version of him is preserved somewhere. We mean someone received his words and sat with them, and then shared them with another, who sat with them too, and shared them further. In that living chain, the Buddha keeps appearing, not as a frozen thing, as a moving current, flowing from person to person. The bones were divided, but words cannot be divided. When you give a word to someone, you still have it, and every time it's spoken, it grows a little deeper. That is what Buddhism means by something that does not die, not a fixed soul preserved in amber, but a living stream that surfaces again and again in the people it has touched. And perhaps you have felt that yourself. A moment when a word someone gave you years ago suddenly surfaced, right when you needed it most. Not because you were looking for it, because it had been quietly living in you all along, waiting for the right conditions to appear. That is how the Dharma moves through the world, not in boxes or towers of stone, but in the pause before someone speaks harshly and then doesn't, in the hand extended to a stranger, in the small ordinary moments where something learned long ago quietly becomes something lived. So the real question may not be, what can we hold on to, but rather, what have we allowed to take root? This isn't only a story from ancient India. You may recognize versions of it in your own life. Here is one scene. Think of a time when a parent passed away, and the family gathered to sort through their belongings. Who gets the watch? Who gets the dishes? Who takes the old photo albums? Sometimes voices get sharper. That should come to me. No, I want that. Quiet friction. This doesn't mean the family is cold. It often means they love deeply. But in those moments, it's worth pausing to ask, is what you really want the object, or is it the memory attached to it? The feeling of that person, the sound of their voice, the way they made you feel safe. If it's the latter, then something becomes clear. That memory is already inside you. You don't need to win the object to have it. You already carry that person. You received them long before they left. This isn't meant as comfort to dismiss the grief. It's a question of what we believe we're holding on to and what we already hold. Here is the second scene. Many people today, especially younger generations, feel a quiet urgency to leave something behind. They document their lives, build followings, record their thoughts, and underneath that, sometimes is a fear. What if I disappear and no one remembers me? What if I'm forgotten? But when we return to the story of the Buddha, something interesting surfaces. He didn't teach in order to be remembered. He taught because the person standing in front of him was suffering, and he had something to offer. He wasn't preserving himself. He was simply present, again and again, for whoever needed him. His words survived not because he tried to preserve them, but because they genuinely reached the people who heard them. There is a difference between trying to be remembered and actually being received. And here is a third scene. Have you ever been stopped in your tracks by a memory of something someone said to you, years ago maybe, a sentence that came back at exactly the right moment? A teacher, a friend, a parent, a stranger on a difficult day. Someone shared this with me once. There's something my boss said to me more than 10 years ago when I was struggling. He's retired now. I doubt he even remembers saying it, but I still hear it, and it still holds me up. That person lives on, not in a shrine, not in a record, but in the person they quietly steadied. You don't have to be famous. You don't have to be eloquent. You don't have to leave behind anything you can see or touch. If you showed up honestly, if you said something true to someone who needed it, you may already be living inside them. The question isn't how many people you reached, it's whether you truly reached them. And sometimes you won't know. The retired boss didn't know. That may be the hardest part to sit with, that the most lasting things we offer are often the ones we gave without keeping score, without watching to see if they landed. So here is one small thing you might try, just one. Write down a word that someone gave you. It can be someone who is no longer here or someone who is still by your side. It doesn't matter. Think of one sentence, something they said, something you've carried without quite realizing it. Write it down somewhere, a notebook, a phone, the back of an envelope, wherever feels right. Just write it. After the Buddha died, his disciples gathered together and did something tender. They compared their memories. He said it this way. No, I remember he used these words. They checked their recollections against each other, carefully, like people counting something precious. Those conversations became the earliest scriptures. They weren't trying to build a monument. They simply had words they couldn't bear to lose. And they wanted to confirm those words with someone else who had heard them too. You may have words like that. Something your mother said while doing the dishes. A joke a friend made that was also somehow the truest thing they ever told you. A quiet comment from a teacher who probably had no idea how much it mattered. Maybe something you once said to someone, and they looked at you in a way that told you it had landed. Writing it isn't about keeping records. It's about letting that word live again, inside you, today. When you write it, the person who gave it to you comes back for a moment, not as a ghost, as a presence. Tonight, before you sleep, just one sentence, one word from someone who gave you something. That's enough. You don't need to make it a habit. You don't need to do it again tomorrow. One line once is enough to retie a thread between you and someone you have loved. Just that, nothing more. And if you find, sometime later, a week from now, a year from now, that you've written another line, don't be surprised. A monk I knew kept what he called a useless notebook, filled with nothing but other people's sentences, and he said it was the only thing he owned that ever talked back to him. The thread once tied has a way of pulling. Some mornings he would open it before sitting down to meditate, not to read, just to rest his hand on the page. Here is a question I'd like to leave with you. No rush to answer it. If there is one thing you have said to someone, something you've long forgotten, that might still be living quietly inside them, what do you think it was? You may not know, you may never know, but take a moment, just a small one, to wonder. You don't have to find the answer. Sometimes the wondering is enough. A fisherman casts his net and walks away, never seeing what he has caught. The water remembers, even when he does not. A child once told her grandmother that her hands smelled like home, and said nothing more of it. The grandmother carried those words to her last breath, folded inside her like a letter she never opened, but always knew was there. If today's teaching touched something in you, we explored the ground beneath it, how the Buddha himself faced the fear of death in an earlier episode. You'll find the link in the description below. The bones were divided into 8, but what we hold today is not bone. What we hold is this: suffering has a cause. Not seeing clearly is where all suffering begins. Turn toward the person in front of you, right now, in this moment. These are the words he spoke while walking, words he kept giving away his whole life. His body is gone, that is certain, but the words remain. And where are they kept? Not in a reliquary, not behind glass. They live in the people who read them, in the people who heard them, and perhaps, just a little, in you, now that you've heard this today. To live on after death is not something reserved for the extraordinary. It doesn't require fame or followers or a monument with your name on it. It may simply be this: one person somewhere hears your voice in a quiet moment, and something in them steadies. You may already be living inside someone, without knowing it. Thank you as always for being here today. May someone you love be alive in you, even now, even today. A grandmother's recipe passed hand to hand. A teacher's correction that still straightens your spine decades later. A stranger on a train who said exactly the right thing, whose face you can no longer picture, but whose words you have spoken aloud, more than once, as if they were your own. We carry these people without always knowing their names, and someday, without knowing it, you will become the stranger on the train. Pause. May today's words quietly take root within you. One story a day. In a week, your words will change. In a month, your eyes will change. In a year, the same world will look completely different.